Yep, looks good, Tom.
Let's start. So welcome, everyone. This is my presentation on forming positive group dynamics. I've done this a few times before, and it's based on largely on my experience of being part of and organizing and leading groups in the outdoors. So I'll give a brief history for myself. I'm a Mountaineers climb leader. Well, I was a climb leader. I'm now a climb leader emeritus, which is a kind way of saying thank you for your service. And I'm a Mountaineers sea kayak leader, and now the chair of the Seattle branch. I do all these outdoor activities as a hobby. It's not my profession. I don't work in the outdoor industry. But I have been doing trips for 35 years, and a lot of my presentation is based on that, on some successes in making groups compatible and function well, and also some failures, big and small, in making groups compatible and function well. Also, I've been practicing Buddhism for 12 years, and that informs some of what I say. Presenting over Zoom is weird. I am talking to a camera. I see images of some people, most not moving. Feedback is strange. Tonight I am trying to pay attention to the chat. If you have questions, I'll look at that and hopefully notice them, but I can be focused and not notice them. And I have put in a few slides to remind me to stop and ask if anyone has questions. So hopefully I'll be able to put in some breaks, get questions, and see how things are going. I do have a question to start, which is, who here is a leader and what activities do you lead? If you could just type that into the chat, it'd be interesting to me to know who I'm talking to. If you're not a Mountaineer leader, say that too. I really support the Mountaineers, but really I support people becoming better at doing the things that inspire them and reward them. Someone's an application, day hike leader, everything except kayaking. That's a broad experience. Not a leader but learning, climb leader with Tacoma. Great. Hike and trail run. Working towards canyon leader. Great. I've done many of the activities that the Mountaineers do, especially many of the technical ones. So I've led a lot of groups. Here's a few examples. 2000, I led a basic climb mentor group, and we did what I called the Clark Mountain Extravaganza. Climb of Clark Mountain through the basic route, plus a couple days more of alpine travel. In 2003, some friends and I went to the Shinjak River up in the Arctic, south slope of the Brooks Peninsula. 2006, I took some students from a youth group I worked with up Mount Triumph as a rock climb. And I've done a lot of hikes in the Sierras in the fall, usually with private groups I put together. And in 2017, I started leading larger kayak expeditions as Mountaineer trips. When I think about leadership, I like to think about definitions to clarify in my mind what it is I'm talking about. So this is my best definition of leadership that I've come up with. Leadership's a big topic, so it's a hard one to define. My definition is that leadership is engaging in actions of leadership and being recognized as a leader. Now, I say engaging in actions of leadership because it allows us to break down leadership into specific actions and then talk about those. Try to talk about leadership as a whole, it's too complex. There's too much to think about, there are too many different ideas. But we can think about specific actions of leadership. In other talks, I get into a little more detail about what the different actions are. But they are things such as navigating or doing risk management, running group decisions, and such. Being recognized is also an important component, because if you're not recognized by the people in your group, it's hard to be the leader of the group. In this talk, we touch on two actions of leadership that I consider to be the essence of leadership. These are inspiring a group to achieve goals and creating a group culture. All the other actions of leadership, and there are many, they can be given away. Navigation could be an action of leadership, but you could also assign someone else to navigate, and you're still a leader. But inspiring a group to achieve goals, that's an action that a leader can't really give away and say they retain leadership. And same with creating a group culture. It's the leader who creates culture. So we touch on these two ideas, which I consider the essence of leadership. The talk tonight is about forming compatible groups and maintaining compatibility. My basic process here is to screen for compatibility. I talk a lot about that. That's the main focus of this. Why? Well, a lot of times I get questions about how do I deal with this problem or that problem? And some of my thought is, well, the best way to deal with those problems is up front, before the group gets together, or as the group's forming. Talk through things, develop compatibility, and develop a culture where those types of actions are less likely to happen. So I think a lot about screening for compatibility. And then building a culture of mutual support. The leader sets the culture. I like to really focus on building a culture of mutual support. Inspire excitement about the trip. I talk about that a little bit. It's an idea I'm developing, so I put it in here for a little bit of discussion, but it's still in the process of being formed. And leading by example. I'll talk a little bit about on the trip, some of my ideas about how to lead on a trip. So the problem, trips can go badly when the group does not get along. In thinking about this, my conclusion was it is usually due to some mismatch between the participants around their goals for the trip, or their expectations of how the trip's run, or their style of doing the trip. And when you have these mismatch, it can create problems on trips. I have a few examples from my history, going way back to when I first joined the Mountaineers intermediate climbing class. On my very first field trip, I met Andrew Boudreau, who was borrowing down his helmet. And I invited him to climb the tooth with me. I think this was early season. So he said, sure. And I also invited my friend Brad Roeder, who I knew through a social circle. But he was equipped with skis and climbing gear and liked to climb. And so the three of us went and climbed the tooth. But we weren't really a compatible group. And I realized that, thinking about it later. We all had the goal of climbing the tooth, but we had different levels of commitment to it. I've concluded that climbers, which Andrew and I were climbers, when they go on a climb, they like to ascend until they reach the summit, or somehow are forced to turn back. Whereas hikers, my friend Brad was a hiker, many of my friends are hikers, they go on a climb, they like to ascend as long as it's fun. And when it stop being fun, they are ready to turn around. So, they're good friends, but they really came to the climb of the tooth with different levels of commitment to that goal. Andrew and I became good friends, and we did a lot of trips together. And about 5 years ago, we had the notion to go to Wenatchee to climb at the crags there, to canoe, and to hike in the area. So we went and did this. We'd been doing so many trips together, I thought we were pretty compatible. But when we got there, I realized, this is a picture of canoeing the Wenatchee. It was super beautiful. We had different priorities of the goals. To me, it was climb, canoe, and hike. Where Andrew, I believe it was climb, canoe, and hike. So I came away from that trip thinking, oh, I just managed to disappoint my friend Andrew by not being as focused on climbing as he wished to be. So problems on trips between people often come down to mismatch in goals, skills, fitness, equipment, a commitment to it, a level of training, their activity level on the trip, or how they want to work, how they socialize with other people. And I simplify this to a mismatch between goals, expectations, and style. So that's a standard structure. Goals and expectations are often used in in what might be called expectation setting exercises. I added style, recognizing that it's yet a third component of what we bring to trips that are neither goals or expectations. I'll get into details about goals, expectations, and style. That's some of the main content that I have. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about some possible ways people solve this. And one of them is, just as the obvious one. I'll just do private trips and I'll handpick my partners and they'll be compatible because they're people I like and I chose them. And I've certainly done a lot of trips with handpicked partners, and some of them have been really good with great, compatible, companionable groups. This hiking trip in Utah was a great example. There was quite a diversity of people, some younger, some older, but we got along well and really enjoyed each other's company and the trip. I called it the trip of ancient wonders because we came across a lot of artifacts from previous cultures. But there are also problems with doing hand-picked trips. It is no guarantee at all, in my experience, of protection from people coming with mismatched expectations. And I have many examples from my history. One problem is that it's a small pool. Well, I myself don't have that big of a group of people to pull from in the past. And so, there's just a short list of likely candidates. And they may not be the best match, but I invite them because they're on my list. So small pool, you may compromise match in order to have people. And people's interests change over time, so your pool gets smaller. I've met over the years a good number of people come back to the Mountaineers. They tell me the story. Yeah, I joined, I was in this activity, I found some buddies, I dropped out of the Mountaineers. My buddies, they changed their priorities. They moved, they had kids, they got involved with their career, and they stopped going on trips with me. But I still wanted to do trips, so now they're back in the Mountaineers. And it's still subject to people arriving with the mismatched goals, expectations, and style. So even if you do a private trip, you can still use these tools. Another possible solution is to choose from a larger pool. But the first obvious problem with this is who? The Mountaineers is a huge pool, and I super appreciate that. But the problem is picking the people who do actually want to do the same trip I want to do in a similar style. So when I started thinking about this, it was this Cape Scott trip. And I knew I could think of people I might want to invite, but I knew there were all kinds of kayakers out in the Mountaineers that I did not know personally or would not think to invite, who might be great partners. So that's when I made that trip a Mountaineers trip. it will contain well-matched people. And I did find well-matched people for that trip. The other thing I realized is that I need a continually renewing pool of partners because people do stop or interests change, and my own interests have changed. I used to climb, I used to ski, now I kayak, and I've been doing more river trips. And finally, it's not an advantage of a large trip, but well, of doing a mountaineers trip, I like the mountaineers and wanted to succeed and want there to be opportunity within the mountaineers to do interesting, exciting trips. So it's an act of service to create an opportunity for other people. These are the people who showed up and came on the Cape Scott trip. Either way, whether you're selecting from the mountaineers as a mountaineers trip in a large pool, or you are handpicking from a small group, you must form a compatible group. You must make sure that people are more or less on the same page. So this is where goals, expectation, and style come in. You clarify your goals for yourself. That part's important. That's my darling cat, Luna. So you have to clarify for yourself. It's a great exercise to think about what are your goals for the trip, what are your expectations, and what's your style. I write that up for myself and I put it in my mountaineers trips. This is more true for longer trips where there's more committed on the trip and it's more important to get a compatible group. For shorter trips, a day trip, a weekend trip, there's less committed to the trip. There's less invested in it. And so I put proportionally less effort into building a compatible group. In fact, on some day trips, I think it's okay if there are problems. That's a teaching opportunity. But for longer trips, there's more invested and we want people to be, to build a compatible group so it goes smoothly. So I put my list of goals, expectations, and style in the mountaineers trip description. And it's my hope that people can self-screen, that they read through what I'm writing, my description of the trip I want to create, and think if it's the trip for them or not. And then I ask people to write out, people who do want to join, I ask them to write out their goals, expectations, and style. And I talk to them about it. We go through like what mine and theirs, and it's a framework for having a discussion. I'll talk about that a bit later too. So when you're organizing a trip, generally you're in one of two situations. One is where there's a clearly designated leader, and the other is it's a collection of peers. All mountaineer trips, I think, fall under the clearly designated leader category, because that's how we work. With private trips with your friends, it could be that you're the designated leader, you're recognized because you're the one organizing it. Or it could be that everyone feels they're a collection of peers working together. You'll either generally be in one of those two situations. And also, generally, you have a set goal. Like, I've decided I want to climb this peak. And then you need to match your group to that goal. People who are capable of doing the objective you set out. Or the other scenarios, you will have a set group of people. And in this case, those are the people who are going to go. And it's important to consider their capabilities and interests and match the goals, the trip you do, to that group. Okay, this is one of my markers for taking questions. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Write in chat or unmute and speak up. Okay. How often do people not read your trip description? For the big trips, I don't think it's often, because they're big trips and people want to know. And they don't get very far because the first thing I ask is, oh, did you read the trip description? But for shorter trips, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Someone asked about risk tolerance. That's one of the two great compatibilities, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But it's a really good observation. So I asked all the participants, and if it's a big trip, yes, I'll ask all the participants. I have a lot invested, they have a lot invested, we want to talk about it. It can feel like an awkward thing to do, to ask people and to hold the conversation. Why do we need to do this? This is unnecessary exercise. Aren't we all on the same page? We're all friends. But so it can feel awkward or unnecessary, but my experience is that sometimes it's very necessary and will turn up important potential conflicts. And almost always, having these discussions up front is part of the process of creating culture. The more you do that up front and bring it into the trip, I think the better chance you have of avoiding other problems. Problems, personality, conflict, mismatched expectations. Come into the trip with a sense of we're working together as a team with people that I know and I care about, and it'll go better. So, as the trip commitment, investment goes up, I get more engaged with specifying goals, expectations, and style. For a weekend, a 5-day trip, I'll list out goals, expectations, style. I'll have maybe brief discussion, but I have less invested in those trips and a little more interest in making them teaching opportunities. Let's let something go wrong, and we can deal with it. Great experience. Longer trips, more effort. How do you ask someone who does not seem fit to withdraw? I'll answer this one, then I'll move on because we're getting to some of the questions that will be answered later. My experience is that usually in discussion, we realize there's not compatibility and it's a mutual decision, which is great. Okay, digging into details about goals, expectations, and style. Goals are what you want to accomplish. There's all kinds of goals you can have, such as reach the summit, get exercise, land on this particular beach, lead a particular pitch, spend time with your romantic partner, catch up on sleep, anything. But goals are how we evaluate trips. Understand your expectations. Expectations are how you think things should be done. They're usually things, the expectations are things we hold for other people. There are many expectations. Wear helmets, that we get early starts, that we regroup at every junction on the trail so we make sure we're together. Move camp every day. Sleep on shore each night. I tried to think of like something that would be an obvious unspoken expectation, but one which I held. And on kayak trips, overnight kayak trips, I do expect that we'll sleep on shore every night. Now, no one's ever had a different opinion, but it's there. Understand your style. Style is how you would like to do things. When I was talking about expedition kayaking, some of my friends said, expedition kayaking? No, I don't think that's for me. I think I'm a vacation kayaker. I like base camps. I don't like to paddle too far in a day. I don't like to move too often. So we realized we had different styles. There are different ways you could do trips, and it's really different style. None is better than the other, but it's important to recognize what your own style is. In terms of interaction with other people, I tend to be a quiet person. I listen, I spend time reflecting. Other people are interactive. They are extroverts and get energy, enjoy talking. So it's important to understand that style. Here's the example of the goals, expectations, and style I put out for the Cape Scott trip. It's fairly long. Sometimes it gets a bit longer. They don't change that much from trip to trip. I'm the same person and the same leader. We'll dig into the details. You don't need to read all of that. So here are the specific goals that I wrote. Be safe, enjoy being out there, whatever the conditions we encounter. Enjoy the company of each other, round Cape Scott, and camp on the Scott Islands. Goals are how we measure trips. They're how we measure the success or failure of trips. We would say that was a great trip because we rounded Cape Scott, because we camped on the Scott Islands, because we made the summit, in less than the Becky time. So goals are how we measure trips. I think for leaders, it's good to start with the goal of being of service. I don't list that in my goals, but it is something I hold. When we're of service, we are thinking about the other people's experience on the trip. We are aware that this is a trip I'm doing, but it's also a service, an opportunity I'm providing for other people to have an experience. So I suggest that as a basic goal for all leaders. Another way I think about goals is you can have dependent or independent goals. I'll explain those. A dependent goal is a goal that depends on conditions and other people, such as making a summit. We all know you go out and there could be objective hazards, bad weather, route difficulties that just prevent you from making the summit. So you're dependent on external conditions. We didn't end up camping on the Scott Islands because bad weather came in. It was dependent. So it's one of my goals on a climbing glacier was to step through the rabbit ears. It's a particular feature on one of the routes. And when I read about it, I thought, oh, that's really cool. I need to step through the rabbit ears. But on the first trip designed to go through them, I missed them. I came up the back side. It wasn't obvious where they were. I missed them. So I didn't think much of it at the time. We're at 10,000 feet with full packs. There's a carryover. It's hard to make progress. So I didn't want to go back or make other people go back. But later, I thought back and I missed the rabbit ears. And there's some disappointment around that, which is the nature of the goal. So I had to return in 2002 and did make it through. Independent goals are things you do have complete control of. You could decide to journal every day, and accepting some really bad conditions, that's something you can do. You could decide to complement other people's strengths, become better at recognizing and vocalizing the things you admire in other people. That's something you yourself can do independent of the weather and what your partners are doing. Or just to have a kind regard to your companions. That's something you can do independent of other things that are going on. So dependent goals are natural in our activities. Every climb has a dependent goal, which is to reach the summit or make it up the climb. they're natural, they develop, and they're great because they inspire us to take on challenges and overcome them. So there's nothing wrong with dependent goals. But because they're natural, if they're all we have, because they're natural, they come to mind easily and they're easy to focus on. And if they're all we have, then it's possible for a trip to be a complete failure because you could miss all your goals. I intentionally kick the dependent goals down towards the bottom of the list so that it encourages me to focus on the independent goals, the other things I knew I decided I wanted to make a goal for this trip, and which I have control of. Enjoy being out there, whatever conditions we encounter, enjoy the company of each other. On the Cape Cod trip, we didn't camp on the Scott Islands, and my companions were a little concerned that I was disappointed because that was one of my goals. Well, it's true that I was disappointed, but I pointed out that it was goal number 5 on my list. And I didn't want to give up the other goals that I'd made. I didn't want to give up being safe to camp on the Scott Islands. I didn't want to give up enjoying being out there, whatever conditions we encounter, to camp on the Scott Islands. And I didn't want to give up enjoying the company of each other. So, consciously thinking about and ordering the goals, helped me. We couldn't achieve that one goal, but it was, in the big picture, was not that big of a disappointment. Moving on to expectations. As I said, these are how we think things should be done. So what it really means is your expectations are not negotiable, because they're how you intend to run the trip. The other thing I realized recently on a solo trip is that expectations are about other people. My solo trip, I knew I had goals for the trip. I knew I had a style of doing it, but I couldn't identify any expectations. If there was some aspect of style that wasn't working for me, I would change it immediately. So expectations are about other people. Here's some examples, as I often have an expectation that participants participate in group decision making. It's something I really expect people to do, when there's a decision that largely has preference or risk, they give a consideration and they express an opinion about it, which could be a weak preference or no preference or a strong preference. But I don't want to try to lead people who don't engage in the group decision making. I also have an expectation that people abide by decisions made by the group, by the leader. I don't want to try to lead a group where people second guess or try to reconsider decisions that have been made. I have an expectation that in rougher conditions, people paddle close as a close group for safety and to facilitate discussions. I don't want to try to lead a group of people who scatter and it's difficult to communicate and difficult to assist each other. And of expectations you might hold, I think a common one is that they have the fitness and the skills required for a trip. A lot of the trips we do require skill and fitness. This was a day canyoneering in Utah when the temperature was about 30 degrees. So in cold weather, we were rappelling into and swimming through pools. You need to be capable. So I often split out a list of skills. These are the ones for Cape Scott. Now think about what's really necessary to do the trip. And when you list out skills, I suggest you be specific so that it's quantifiable. Like if for hiking, it might be how many miles or your pace on a trail, how many miles per hour, how fast can you ascend. It might be how much weight you might be expected to carry, and so forth. So if you're listing skills, make sure to list things that are actually necessary and then be specific so that people have a objective measure against which to assess themselves. After Cape Scott, I realized there was a list of really important skills that I didn't have. They're just basically the ability to operate group systems. In future trips, I put set up the tarp and bug netting, set up and operate stoves, collect and filter water. I was the only person who knew those systems when the trip started, and it was awkward to find time in arriving at camp to explain. And then the third category is style. Style is held more loosely. It's how you like to do things, but it may be negotiable. But if you find too many style points on which you disagree, maybe it's incompatible. So here's some examples. Like shared dinners. I like to do shared dinners if others are interested, but it's one on which I'm completely negotiable. And if not interested, I'll do my own dinners. But days can be fairly long, up to 15 nautical miles. That's kind of a style because you could do trips with less distance, but that's my style. And well, I might negotiate on that. Some trips, no, that's really what we're going to do on this trip. So it's important to discuss it. Potentially that could be moved to expectation, but generally I keep it in style. The question comes up, is something a goal, an expectation, or a style? If it's something that evaluates success or failure of a trip, like start early every day, is that a goal, expectation, or style? If you feel the trip's success or failure depends on whether or not you start early every day, then that's a goal for you. But if it's just something that's necessary for the weather and the region you're going to, but it's necessary to complete the trip, then it's an expectation. You expect people to start an early start every day. On the other hand, if it's because you're an early riser, but you're willing to hang around and start later, then perhaps that's a style for you. In the end, it may not matter so much where you put something in the list, whether you make, particularly between expectation and style. The main point is to get your expectations, your goals, expectations, and style down, clarified to yourself, and in print in a way that other people can see it, for others to do the same, and then it becomes something you can talk about. Doesn't matter exactly how you categorize it, it becomes something you can talk about with other people. So that's most of what I have to say about goals, expectation, and style, and it's an opportunity to break and see if anyone has questions about those. Someone asked, how do you manage to screen for fitness matching? That's kind of the next topic, so I will answer that in a moment, but let's see if there are any other questions about goals, expectations, and style. Okay. Or why not just make non-negotiable style issues expectations? Because maybe I'll negotiate about them on some trips. Maybe they're not quite as firm. It's, again, it can be confusing or it can be unclear where they should go. Entirely up to you where you put it. The main point is it's something you've thought about, how you want to do the trip. It's been written down so it can be discussed with people. How do you invite feedback on your leadership style? That's a great question. I'm not great on feedback, but I think I have some observations about that. Let's see. I'm trying to think about this. There's certainly some things you want to know about your partners, like what their comfort level is with what you're doing. If someone's beginning to feel uncomfortable with what's going on, you as the leader absolutely want to know that. And the way you get people to give you that information is to make it safe for them to give you that information. So that is partly about setting culture. I'll talk about that a bit. I think the same way with feedback is you get people to give you feedback by letting them know you really want feedback and letting them know it's safe for them to give you feedback. When someone has some feedback, you're like, oh yeah, I definitely want to hear that. Thanks for telling me. And you really consider it and try to do it, or give it some real thought, but never make them feel unsafe or inappropriate or wrong for giving you feedback. How much of what you just discussed in internal for your process, and how much group process? Okay, well, I think we'll get to that too. I think it's really good for our own selves for any trip we do, to have a sense of what our goals, expectations, and style are. But then as leader, there is a process to work with other people. So there are two questions about pace and risk tolerance. And I consider these the two great compatibilities. Pace is really a stand-in for fitness. Not perfectly, but fitter people are often able to travel at a faster pace. And these two, if you're on trips with people of different pace or different risk tolerance, that's a significant incompatibility. There are also things that I've found hard to screen for or figure out over the phone. I've had some fantastic failures determining these over the phone. So pace, well, I get specific about numbers for kayaking, but that many people don't actually know how fast they paddle. And then there's a question about, you can paddle a specific speed on flat water, but when you get in rough conditions or a headwind, a lot of people really slow down. And one way, the only reliable way to know if someone has a similar pace is to go on trips with them and paddle in different conditions, or go on hikes with them, hike up a hill with them, hike up 4,000 feet with someone. And then you'll start to get a sense. So longer trips, it may well be appropriate to do some interview outings. Risk tolerance is another one. It's highly individual what someone's risk tolerance is. There's no right risk tolerance, but different risk tolerances are incompatible. It results in one person feeling like they're being drugged to into grave danger all the time, or the other person feeling they're being held back from having great fun all the time. You really, on a trip, I aspire to not people feel unsafe. So I aspire to make choices that are within the risk tolerance of the most risk adverse person. I don't want to push people too hard, but I also want the opportunity myself to push myself. So it's important to choose people of similar skill and similar risk tolerance when that's what I want. When one of my goals is to push myself, I need to find people who are compatible. You might be able to determine some differences by seeing what kind of trips people do. That can give you a good insight. But in a lot of my experience, the only way to really know is to be on a trip and get to some situation. And if you're both like hold up at the same point and say, well, I'm not sure about that, that's a similar risk tolerance. But it's hard to create those situations. In discussion, you can put out scenarios, proposed scenarios, where there's a risk assessment to be made and see what people's response is. For pace and risk tolerance, there's nothing like going out on a trip with them, going into something difficult and seeing how they respond to it. I think my friend Andrew and I have been long-term partners because we have similar paces and because we have similar risk tolerance. We've been in a number of difficult situations, and we often feel the same way. We recognize, oh, there's some risk here, and we manage it. There's another aspect, which is, well, we're social animals, and some people like other people, and some people don't. There's just this personality mix, and there's no way to analyze it, and no need to analyze it. You can just, you know that some people you click with and some people you don't. So sometimes I'm thinking about this. I put together a social list. We'll look at some of these things. I know I'm interested in long, slow, focused conversations. I enjoy people when we can dig into some kind of meaty topic and talk about it from a couple different angles. And the conversation stays focused on that. And it's slow enough that everyone has the opportunity to think about the topic and have something to say about it. And I particularly like long trips, some great ones. We'll have some topic of conversation that comes up again and again over several days of the trip. And we'll talk about it for an hour one day, and then a day later, we'll pick it up again as people have thought about it. So that's one of my social styles. And maybe putting this out there gives an indication to potential partners that this is something I'd like to create on the trip. I've also, as a meditator, have created periods of mindfulness. Often in the morning, we'll say, okay, tomorrow morning we get up, no talking to each other. And after doing that several days, or on one trip, my friend said, they were really nice. It was kind of a vacation from being on the trip. Rather than getting up and having to interact with everyone, every individual was able to get up and be in their own space of thought, whatever they wanted that to be. So, that's something I've found useful and my friends have enjoyed. And finally, I'd say encourage people to have an effort to maintain unconditional positive regard of others, which means accepting quirks and unskillful actions. Everyone has quirks in their behavior, and everyone has unskillful moments. And the more we're able to accept our companions and understand or hope that behind all that there is positive intention, it helps the social interaction of trips. So to get on to the question about discussion, we write down our own goals, expectations, style, get clear in our mind what kind of trip we want to run. It may take trips years of experience to get clear, but we get clear. We write it out. And then I ask people for trips where there's a lot of invested in the trip, for a trip that's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, for a trip where it's the major focus of the summer, where you're going to be with the people for 2 or 3 weeks, where you're going to be engaging in stressful situations, working hard. In these trips, yes, you really want to put effort into bringing the group into alignment. So this is when I'll ask other people, yes, write out your goals, expectations, style. And then I'll meet with them. Sometimes it ends up being individually, sometimes it ends up being in a group. And we spend time discussing. So this is a bit of a tricky discussion to have. And not so much because it can be difficult or awkward, but I think more, well, maybe that's it. The tricky part is going into enough detail to actually surface the incompatibilities. It's easy. So what we need to do in a discussion with other people is to project into the future. Imagine the trip as it's going to lay out in enough detail that you begin to identify the incompatibilities. So you have to discuss points in detail. It's really good to ask open-ended questions about why they wrote down particular goals, or expectations, or style. And it's good to pose scenarios to them. I have a couple examples. Someone brought the expectation that everyone do their share of the work, which on the surface sounds great. I'll sign up for that, and probably most people will. But what exactly does it mean to do their share of the work? Who's going to judge when someone's doing their share or not? Is it the particular person who brought this? What's their standard of doing a share of the work? What happens? Pose a scenario. What if one of our people just takes an extra 30 minutes to set up their tent? You know, we're setting up, we get our tent set up, and we're setting up the general camp. They're off setting up their tent. It takes them longer. So they're not doing as much camp setup. Yet it's important to that person. It seems to be their pace, and getting their tent set up to their satisfaction is important. How would you feel about that? So behind what looks like could be simple, obviously agreeable expectation, there's the potential for conflict. And I'm not saying there's conflict there, but what you need to do when discussing with people is project into it and figure out what it actually means. It's better when things like expectations have very descriptive actions, when they're descriptive of the action intended. So what is share of work? Well, you could make that everyone have a task about setting up camp, and everyone do their task when we get to camp. That's very descriptive. You know what you're supposed to do, and you do what you're supposed to do. Whereas everyone do their share of the work is vague. Speaking of vague, be safe. Sounds good, but what does that mean? This comes straight from my list, be safe. Well, risk tolerance is so personal and different. If we really want to be safe, we would just stay home. If we're going out, we've already accepted some level of risk. So, Tom, what does it mean to be safe? When you push me on it, I say, make all decisions with risk management in mind. We're going to decide something. Let's talk about, are there risks on each side? What could go wrong with that? So someone could have the goal of explore the natural environment. And someone did on one of my trips. And knowing that, I was able, it became a priority to me to help them achieve that goal. And in a particular at a point where I set out more time to spend on an island. So, and then I was happy to know I had time to walk around. So the discussion part, getting into like how effective each one is, the potential problems with a goal, expectation, or style, and discussion, it's more complex. And I have 2 workshops coming up that are designed to be more interactive and dig into some details about using goals, expectations, and stuff. Another point for questions. I know people take a little while to formulate a question. So just give it a moment. Okay, I'll move on. Oh, someone just wrote a question. Oh, Sarah, yeah. Links to the workshops. I think one is full, the other one had space last time I checked. Building culture. So now we come to some ideas that I'm really working on developing. I know it's important to build culture. I have some ideas about doing it, but I'm not at all feel like I have any definitive answers. I'm just forming ideas. I think there are two important components. One is to state the culture you want. Write it down. Put it in your social section or in some section of what you write out for people to read. If you do that, you're putting it out there, and people can think and respond to that. And it might draw in some people to join your trip because they read about the culture you want to create and you respond to it and say, yes, I want to be on a trip with that culture. The second important part about creating culture is that you yourself live that culture. You act in ways that support the culture you want to create. You be the person you want on the trip. So I like to create a culture of mutual support where we are all going to work together to help everyone. And so I put that in writing. And on a trip, I will try to look for people who need help, people, any place where I can move boats, carry gear someplace, set up a camp, clean dishes, any place where I feel I have some excess capacity, and particularly where other people might need support. So I try to live out the culture I want to create. So important because the way the leader acts is a large part in creating the culture of the trip. The other topic is to inspire excitement about the trip. If people are going, if you're organizing a long trip, people are investing a lot in it. And it is, they'll get more out of it when they're excited by it. They'll put more into it and they'll get more out of it when they're excited by it. I had a great example of this back when I was working with the High School Post. It's a youth group that was out of Garfield High School. One year, they did a trip to Utah, canyoneering, that I helped with. And one year it was run by a kid named Theo, who was a fantastically mature kid. He was a great organizer and great leader. One of the adults who came down was a teacher at the school. She was one of the chaperones. And she said when Theo was running the trip, he would stop by her classroom every week for weeks before the trip and give a thumbs up, Utah coming. And she knew it was coming. She was looking forward to it. And his reminders, his little pep, made her inspired about the trip coming up. The subsequent year, another kid ran the trip, and he just didn't communicate as well. In fact, she said, I signed up to do the trip, I put it on my calendar, and then for months I didn't hear anything, and I wasn't even sure it was happening. So at that point, for that year, she wasn't very excited about it. So I think there is something that we as leaders, especially on longer trips where there's more investment, there's something very useful we can do to encourage people to feel that they're engaged in something special, engaged in something unique, engaged in something that's really worth doing. So it's an idea I'm forming. I think there's ways to do this, and I think it makes for a culture of more engagement. I want to ask if there are any questions about this. I have one more topic, which is about the trip, about actions on a trip, and it's about that and a little bit of pep talk. Do you have specific tactics or activities about how to build culture? In particular on a shorter trip. Well, a really good question. On a longer trip, I have often gotten the group together for a weekend. So we'll do a whole other trip to do the trip, to practice skills together, to learn how to light each other's stove, and so forth. And that goes a long way. Just spending time with each other goes a long way towards building culture. But on shorter trips, you have less time. You can't expect people to spend a disproportionate amount of time. So it comes down more to short things you might say. First, of course, what you can put in a description. But then secondly, when you give an onshore briefing, you can talk about the importance of risk management. You can talk about the importance of helping each other. You can talk about your desire for feedback. So there's small things you can say. I'm not thinking of any obvious examples, but pay attention and you will see on any trip, the leader says things and does things that start to create the culture of the trip. If you're a naturally gregarious person, you might go greet everyone and say, hey, glad to see you, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. That creates a sense of being welcome. If that's naturally your style, that is starting to create the culture of the trip. Everyone has their own personality and style, and maybe a little bit we can push ourselves to be something. I don't think we need to push ourselves to be too much of what we're not. I'm not a very gregarious person, but I push myself a little bit to welcome people. So pay attention to on trips you go on, what leaders are doing. And probably what you'll see, a lot of what you'll see may not be conscious, but you might see some leaders who just naturally create a certain style by the way they greet people and talk to people. You might think, oh, that's very skillful. You might hear some particular turns of phrase and think, ah, that's very skillful. What leadership style do you prefer? For example, servant, coaching, democratic leadership with your enculturated and corporate line of effort. Consider the limited time you have. What leadership style? I think one thing I learned from Knowles is they had the number one, which is to say that everyone had one unique style of leadership. So every one of us will have our own way of leading trips. That's what I mean by don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to be a leader that you're not. Be the leader that you are. So I personally prefer a lighter touch as leader, where I want to know what people think, what they want to do. I want to give some guidance that pushes the trip in the direction I want, but I try not to be overly directive. But that's just my style of doing things. Just explore what your own style is. I'm pondering the idea that the work up front on communicating about setting goals, expectations, and style might naturally flow into creating culture for the trip. And yes, it absolutely does. Having those discussions creates a culture of having discussions about what are our goals for this trip? It creates a culture of talking about what are our expectations. And if someone's getting upset about expectations, you've talked about them. So you've already established that dialogue, and it's easier to bring it up on trips. So yeah, it is part of creating trip culture. Okay. So you put together, you organize a trip, you did all the logistics, you put out your goals, expectations, style. You have selected partners, had discussions with them. It's come together. Now you're on a trip. So here's some of my thoughts about being on a trip. As a leader, be of service. We go on trips. We lead trips. We go on trips because for multiple reasons. One of them is for our own reward. Especially for me, longer trips. There are usually trips I choose because I want to do them personally. So I go into a trip with both a mixture of personal goals and the goal of being of service. If I have no goal of being of service and bring only personal goals, I'm not a very good leader. I'm mainly thinking about what I want out of the trip, and I'm blind to what other people want. If I go into the trip with the idea of being of service, then the larger I can expand that, then the more capacity I have to pay attention to and care about the experience that other people are having. So be of service. It'll make you a better leader. Lead by example. I think ultimately that's the only type of leadership there really is. So be the person you want people to be. And appreciate your group, the group you're going with. You've chosen them, and everyone has good qualities. You saw my cat come by. Now, this is a little digression. For a long time, I worked at Paw's Cat Adoption Center, adopting out cats. And sometimes I worried, oh, this cat doesn't have much personality. Some cats had great personality. And I'd send them home with adopters feeling like, that's good. This cat has so much personality that these adopters will become the protector of the cat. Other cats, I was concerned. Not so much personality, and I'm worried about that cat. Will the people love it and protect it? I've realized that every cat has unique, beautiful characteristics. You saw my fussy little cat come by. I love her dearly, and it's because I can appreciate her good qualities. So every person on your trip has good qualities, and you can appreciate those. Knowles has an idea of expedition behavior. And it's a great idea. It's a great word to talk about. But when I was first putting this presentation together, I looked for a definition, couldn't find it. So this is my definition of it. Actions I do that help people feel they are part of a team, and we will all succeed. I'll break that down. So actions. What I mean is they have to be visible actions to other people, actions of body and actions of speech. It's great to have good regard for other people. That's the beginning of our actions, but they need to be visible. Actions you do. This is really about looking at your own behavior, not a tool to examine other people's behavior, that help other people. We cannot make other people have specific feelings, but our actions do influence other people's feelings. So we can help other people feel they are part of a team. It is very uncomfortable to feel that you are not part of a team, especially when you happen to be with the people for 2 weeks. And for some people, it's not too hard to drop into that feeling. Or if you're slow or getting the cues that you're holding things up, it's not too hard to drop into that feeling. So I really want to protect people from ever feeling that they have fallen out of being part of the team. I want people to feel they are part of the team and that we will all succeed together. But brings up the question, what is success? Success is achieving our goals, which comes back to the importance of setting our goals. Setting our goals both as some dependent goals, such as reaching the summit, that inspire us to work, push ourselves, and achieve the satisfaction of working hard, using skill, and achieving something. But also setting goals that are independent of objective conditions that we can also achieve, regardless of what else happens. So good expectation behavior is working together as a team to make things that need to happen, make people feel that they will be supported to do what needs to be done. On a trip, it's important to communicate for all people, really. Voice your opinion. As a leader, I need to hear other people's opinions because I want to do the things that they want to do. So speak up for your needs. As a leader, particularly, you're the one who can facilitate discussion about the trip. Participants can't, you can. And you can create the culture of doing that, but you have to make the times for that to happen. And in discussion, give people time to express their opinions. It can take people a while to feel like, I could say this. So creating space for people to say the important things. For my Buddhist practice, I appreciate the value of patience. We define it as to wholeheartedly welcome whatever arises without thinking it should be any other way. Sometimes on trips, things do not go the way we want. And patience is the antidote to that. To be impatient is to be in conflict with reality, in conflict with what is happening. And to have patience is to be in harmony with what is happening. And contentment. Contentment is something we can do just by choosing it. In the culture, there's often an understanding that we're content only when we gather the right conditions. But we can be content by choosing to be content. You can have contentment with the group you're going with. You can have contentment with the weather, whatever conditions you're in. And you can have contentment with yourself, who you are, and what you're able to do. So here I restated the job as a leader. This is a different definition, but I think it's in many ways a very functional definition. Your job as a leader is to help people be happy about the trip. So enjoy themselves, have a sense of accomplishment, and a sense of community and teamwork. It's great to be part of a group that functions like that, so we start by being a person who functions like that as the leader, and that sets culture. Working together to do what needs to be done. This was a long trip up in Alaska in somewhat difficult conditions. The cameras only worked when the conditions were good. But four of us pulled together really well and enjoyed working together. Everyone wants to be part of a team that functions like this. So as a leader, it's part of the essential actions of leadership to create a culture that supports each other, creates a community of people that is compatible, create a community of people that support the goals of the trip and support each other achieving the goals of the trip. That you will all, the sense that you're part of a team and you will all succeed together. So summary. Before the trip, we clearly communicate about goals, expectations, and style. Think about the culture you want and build that through verbal communication and by example. And inspire excitement. Right? Help people think about how special what they're going to do is. And that, again, comes from thinking yourself that what you're about to do, the trip you're going to go on, is special and exciting. And then during the trip, be of service, which helps us, our capacity to notice and care about what's happening with other people. Lead by example and appreciate your group. I have a few final thoughts, but this is a good place to ask for any final questions or summary of my presentation. Any questions? Lots to think about. Yeah, it's a lot to practice. Every trip, more opportunity to think about. You can set a goal on a trip to pay attention to one aspect of your leadership. And then always, it's common for me to debrief, maybe just with myself, but to think about, oh, I did that well, and boy, I sure could improve in this area. The slides will be available. I'll put together a shorter PDF of the slides that I think summarizes the main points. And we'll talk about making the presentation available. So that we'll see about that. Okay, so I have some few final thoughts. These are, in some ways, I think that I feel like these are the deepest lessons that I've learned as a leader. They may seem trivial, but to me, these are been my deep lessons. Paddle together so you can help each other. You can translate that in any way you want to the activities you're engaged in. But it's about being present to help each other. Encourage the slower people. They're the ones who are at greatest risk of feeling they've fallen outside of the team, feeling isolated, and may have the greatest impact when you help them along and keep them in the team, and the team working together. And enjoy the trip you're on, because it's the trip you're on. You'll only do so many trips in your life, only so many big trips. And it's worth engaging each one with the greatest inspiration, excitement, capacity to be content or enjoy what's going on. It's a waste to go on a trip and think it's dissatisfying, not what you want. My companions are not being the people that I want them to be dissatisfied, discontent. So enjoy the trip you're on, practice patience, contentment, and acceptance. Okay, thank you. I hope this is useful.
Thank you, Tom. This is great.